I never thought I would find myself in this situation, writing about my wife's infidelity. My name is Mike, and I'm a 38-year-old father of two, Jake, my 10-year-old son, and Lily, my 7-year-old daughter. My wife, Corinne, and I had been together for over a decade. On the surface, we looked like the perfect family. We had a nice house in the suburbs, our kids were involved in sports, and we even took family vacations every summer. However, there were cracks in our marriage that I had been brushing off for a while. Things started to shift about 6 months ago. Corinne began spending more time away from home. At first, I thought it was just her trying to balance work and family since she had recently taken on a new project at her job. I would often come home to find her working late or out running errands. But then, the late-night phone calls and the sudden need to catch up with friends raised some red flags. It nagged at me, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, Corinne had always been the more social one in our relationship. She had a pretty active social life, and I figured she just needed some space. But then one day, as I was cleaning out the garage, I stumbled upon a box of old sports memorabilia. Inside, I found Jake's Little League trophies and some of his old uniforms. Flipping through the box, I noticed a note tucked away at the bottom. It was from Corinne to Jake's baseball coach, Kyle. "Thanks for being such a great coach. You make the game so much fun, and I appreciate your support. Let's grab a drink sometime." My gut twisted. I had noticed Kyle at the games, a charming guy in his early 40s who seemed to connect with the kids exceptionally well. I brushed it off then, thinking he was just a good coach, but the note, that was something else entirely. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to Corinne. She was acting differently, more evasive, less engaged with our family. One evening, I decided to do a little digging. I went through her messages on her phone when she left it unattended. I know it wasn't the most ethical thing to do, but my gut was screaming at me. What I found shattered my world. Text after text, all flirty and suggestive, exchanged between her and Kyle. They were meeting up for drinks more often than I thought. My heart raced and my blood boiled. I was in disbelief, but the evidence was right there in black and white. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. With the kids at school and Corinne running errands, I stewed in my anger. I confronted her when she got home, throwing the texts in her face. "What's going on, Corinne? You think I wouldn't find out?" She looked caught off guard, her usual confidence faltering for the first time. "Mike, calm down. It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice shaky. "Not what it looks like. You've been flirting with Jake's coach. You think I'm stupid," I shouted, feeling a mix of rage and heartbreak. Corinne fumbled for her words. "We were just being friendly. You know how tight-knit these sports communities are. I didn't mean anything by it." It was like watching a bad movie. The excuses flew out of her mouth like a desperate attempt to grasp onto something solid. But I felt the floor give way beneath me. I had trusted her completely, and this was her response, bitchy, defensive, and dishonest. As she rambled on, I felt my emotions shift. I was no longer just angry, I was hurt and heartbroken. Here was the woman I loved, the mother of my children, standing before me, weaving lies to cover her tracks. The betrayal stung like 1,000 daggers, each one twisting deeper. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Corinne, this isn't just a mistake. You're having an affair. What do you think this means for us, for the kids?" She shot back, "You're overreacting. You don't understand." At that moment, I realized I was in a fight not just for my marriage but for my kids. I needed to figure out my next steps. How could I protect them from this betrayal? I felt my world crumbling, but I knew I had to make a decision. I wouldn't let this slide. Not now, not ever. How had we come to this? The realization that I was facing my wife's betrayal made everything else fade into the background. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. After my confrontation with Corinne, the air in our home felt charged with tension, a palpable weight that lingered long after the argument. I spent that night tossing and turning, my mind racing with a storm of emotions. I had spent over 10 years building a life with Corinne, and now all of it felt like it was crumbling before my eyes. Rage, sadness, and confusion clawed at my insides. I had to figure out what to do next. The following day, I decided to gather more information to understand the extent of her betrayal. I couldn't help but feel like I was living in some twisted reality show. I took the day off work, claiming I wasn't feeling well, and watched as Corinne left for another errand. In the hours that followed, I drove to the local coffee shop where I knew Kyle often hung out after practice. I parked a couple of blocks away and sat in my car, my heart pounding as I kept an eye on the entrance. I felt like a detective on a stakeout, ready to gather evidence. I knew I had to see for myself if they would meet up. After a while, I saw Corinne walk in. She looked radiant, with her hair perfectly styled and a fresh outfit that screamed, "I'm ready for a date." I felt a surge of anger as I watched her greet Kyle with a hug that lasted too long. They shared laughter and exchanged flirtatious glances over coffee, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt rage boil up within me, and every fiber of my being wanted to confront them right then and there. But I held back. I wasn't ready to blow my cover. Instead, I took a few pictures with my phone, evidence for later should I need it. I needed to be smart about this for the sake of my kids. I didn't want to create unnecessary chaos, and if I was going to expose Corinne, I wanted it to be done right. After about an hour, I saw them part ways. Corinne kissed Kyle on the cheek before heading back to the car. The sight of it made my stomach churn. It was clear this was more than just a casual fling. This was an affair that could have serious consequences for our family. Once she drove away, I followed her home, my mind racing with thoughts of what I would say next. When she returned, I pretended everything was normal, but I was in a different place entirely. I greeted her with a smile, suppressing the anger bubbling beneath the surface. We made dinner together, and I acted as if nothing was wrong, all the while plotting my next move. I realized I had to confront her again, but this time it would be on my terms. That evening, while we were watching TV, I decided to bring up the topic casually. "Hey, did you have a good day? It looked like you were having fun at the coffee shop." Corinne looked at me, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Yeah, just catching up with a few friends," she replied, her tone too defensive for my taste. "Just friends, huh, like Kyle," I said, keeping my voice steady. I watched as her expression shifted from calm to panicked. "You know, it's hard to believe it was just friendly considering the way you two were acting." She stammered, "Mike, I told you it's nothing." "You're being ridiculous." I felt myself growing impatient. "You seriously expect me to believe that? I saw you with him, Corinne. The hugs, the laughter, it's more than just friends. This isn't the first time, is it?" For a moment I thought she might confess, but instead she fell back on her defensive tactics. "You're just jealous because I'm more social than you. You never want to go out and meet people." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This isn't about jealousy, Corinne. This is about trust. You've betrayed me, and that's all there is to it." She glared at me, her eyes filled with defiance. "You're overreacting, Mike. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're just trying to control me." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. The conversation spiraled into another argument, with her continuing to deflect and deny. No matter what I said, she insisted I was being unreasonable. It was clear to me then that there was no point in trying to have a rational conversation. After a long, exhausting night, I sat alone in the dark, grappling with the emotional fallout. I felt betrayed and disrespected. Every lie left me feeling more lost. I spent the next few days pondering how to confront the situation. I wanted to expose her for what she truly was, but I also had to think about Jake and Lily. I couldn't let this affair destroy their innocent lives. I needed a plan, not just for confrontation, but for my future and the future of my children. I decided I would start by documenting everything. I would gather evidence of the affair, speak to a lawyer, and then figure out how to approach the custody issue. I wanted full custody of the kids, and I needed to protect them from this toxic environment. In those days leading up to my confrontation, I felt a strange mix of fear and empowerment. I was alone in this fight, but I knew I had to be strong for my children. They deserved better than a mother who would betray their father and put her own desires above their well-being. I was ready to take action. I had to ensure that justice was served, not just for me but for Jake and Lily. As the days passed, I gathered my evidence like pieces of a puzzle, trying to create a clear picture of the betrayal that had shattered my marriage. I documented Corinne's late-night outings, her suspicious texts, and the countless lies she spun to cover her tracks. Each time she left the house, I noted the time and the circumstances, hoping to piece together a case that would not only expose her but also ensure that I secured full custody of our kids. I consulted with an attorney who specialized in family law. The conversation was eye-opening. In cases of infidelity, especially with a partner that can influence the children negatively, you may have grounds for sole custody, she explained, her tone clinical but sympathetic. I felt a surge of hope mixed with determination. I had to put my children's well-being first, even if that meant fighting like hell for it. The lawyer guided me through what to expect. We discussed how to document everything meticulously, including any interactions I had with Corinne where she was evasive or dishonest. I took notes on our conversations, gathering my strength for the inevitable confrontation that loomed ahead. I knew I had to confront her again, but I wanted to do it in a way that would leave no room for her to squirm out of the truth. A week later, I had enough evidence to feel confident about my next steps. Corinne was out with her friends again. This time she mentioned a girls' night. I sensed it was just a cover for something else, but I stayed calm. While she was out, I laid out the evidence on our kitchen table, the texts, the photographs, the notes I had gathered. I was ready. When she returned home, I confronted her as soon as she walked through the door. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. Her face turned pale as she noticed the layout of evidence before me. "What is this, Mike?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play dumb, Corinne. I know you've been seeing Kyle. I've got everything right here," I said, gesturing to the evidence. "You can't deny it any longer." Her demeanor shifted from shock to indignation. "You went through my things, seriously. This is a violation of my privacy." I shook my head, keeping my resolve. "You violated our marriage vows, Corinne. You're the one who's betrayed our family. Don't turn this around on me." I watched as the anger in her eyes turned to panic. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. You're just trying to make me look bad." "This isn't about making you look bad. This is about our kids. They deserve better than a mother who lies and cheats," I said, my voice rising. "You think this is just a fling. This affects them, and I won't let you drag them into this mess." She started to pace, her hands shaking. "What do you want from me, Mike? I'm sorry. I thought we could work through this." "Work through this?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You thought I'd just accept your infidelity, that I'd forgive you that easily." Her silence was telling. She had no real answers, no real remorse. I pressed on. "You talk about working through this, but all I see is someone who wants to avoid the consequences of her actions. You're not sorry for what you've done. You're sorry you got caught." Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. I needed to stand my ground. "I'm filing for divorce, Corinne. I want full custody of the kids. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about protecting our children from your selfishness." She looked at me, desperation flooding her features. "You'll regret this, Mike. You think I'm the only one who's had fun. You think you can raise them alone." "I can and I will," I replied, my determination unwavering. "You've shown me who you really are, and I won't let our kids be hurt by your choices." As the reality of my decision sank in, I felt a mix of sadness and resolve. I was ready to endure whatever came next. I would fight for Jake and Lily, no matter the toll it took on me. I knew Corinne would not go quietly, and that the battle ahead would be tough. But I had made my choice, and I would not waver. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of loss, loss of a dream, loss of what I thought my family was. I tucked the kids into bed and kissed them good night, reminding myself that I would do whatever it took to ensure they had a stable and loving environment. I watched them sleep, their innocent faces free from the turmoil swirling around me. In the days that followed, I filed the paperwork for the divorce and custody arrangements. I prepared myself for the oncoming storm, knowing that Corinne wouldn't easily accept defeat. I braced myself for her retaliation, but I also steeled myself for the possibility of a brighter future, one where my children could thrive free from the toxicity that had seeped into our home. In the midst of the chaos, I found a sense of clarity. I was no longer just a husband in a failing marriage. I was a father determined to fight for his children's future. I learned that sometimes, justice means standing up even when it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. I would make sure my kids were safe, even if it meant facing the full wrath of a woman who had betrayed everything we once stood for. Once I filed for divorce, a new chapter of my life began, one filled with legal meetings, unsettling conversations, and a constant sense of uncertainty. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. I focused on the kids, making sure they felt secure and loved, even as my world was falling apart around me. Jake and Lily had no idea what was happening between their parents. I wanted to shield them from the chaos as much as possible. Karen, on the other hand, was anything but composed. The moment she received the divorce papers, she went into full defense mode. Her reaction was both surprising and predictable. She started to play the victim, telling friends and family that I was overreacting and being unreasonable. It was infuriating to hear how she twisted the narrative, but I knew it was a tactic to gain sympathy and turn others against me. Every time we met regarding the custody arrangements, she would put on a show, crying, pleading, and attempting to manipulate me. Mike, I never wanted any of this. We can work things out. We can go to counseling. She would say, her voice shaky, yet I could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. But I had made up my mind. I wouldn't let her emotional antics sway me. I stood firm during our discussions with the attorney, presenting my case clearly and decisively. I made it known that my priority was the well-being of our children. I highlighted her affair, her dishonesty, and how it affected our family dynamic. What's important here is that I want what's best for Jake and Lily, I stated during one meeting, my eyes locked on Karen's. They deserve a stable home where they feel safe and loved, not one filled with lies and betrayal. Karen shot back, "You think you can just take them away from me? I'm their mother, this is not fair." I felt my resolve strengthen. Fairness aside, this is about protecting them. You've shown you're not capable of providing that right now. As the weeks dragged on, the legal battles intensified. Karen hired a high-powered attorney who specialized in custody cases. It felt like I was suddenly thrown into a gladiator arena, facing off with a professional who was relentless in her pursuit of victory. The back-and-forth negotiations were grueling. Karen was aggressive, often trying to paint me as an unfit parent simply because I was standing my ground. I could see through her attempts to manipulate the situation. She would often bring up my occasional late nights at work, or how I wasn't as involved in the kids' extracurricular activities as I should be. Mike doesn't care about this family anymore. He's always busy with work, she would declare to anyone who would listen, including our lawyer. But I wasn't going to let her lies fly unchecked. I presented evidence of my involvement in the kids' lives, photos from soccer games, school events, and family outings. I wanted to prove that I was a dedicated father, while she was the one making reckless choices that jeopardized our family unit. The struggle for custody became a bitter fight, and every time I faced off against Karen in court, it felt like the stakes got higher. The more she fought, the more I realized that I had to dig deeper. I needed to ensure that she could not just wriggle out of the consequences of her actions. During one court session, I noticed a shift in the judge's demeanor. He listened intently as I described how I was trying to create a stable environment for the children, free from the toxicity of infidelity. I shared my observations about Karen's increasingly erratic behavior and how her affair impacted our family. The judge seemed to appreciate my commitment to our kids and the seriousness of the situation. Karen's lawyer, however, wasn't going to let me get off that easy. "Mr. Thompson is just trying to paint my client in a negative light to gain sympathy," she argued. "He's focusing on her past mistakes instead of her as a mother." I could feel my heart racing, but I stood tall. This isn't about painting anyone in a bad light. It's about the future of Jake and Lily. I'm not here to destroy their mother. I'm here to protect them from her choices. In that moment, I felt a wave of strength wash over me. I was fighting for my children, and I would do whatever it took. The judge seemed to take notice, nodding slightly as I spoke. I held on to that feeling, knowing it was essential to remain steadfast in my convictions. Outside of the courtroom, I found solace in my children. They were my anchor during this tumultuous time. I made sure to spend quality time with them, even if it meant driving them to practices or helping with school projects late into the night. Whenever I felt overwhelmed by the stress of the court proceedings, I took a step back and reminded myself of my ultimate goal, to ensure that Jake and Lily had a loving and stable environment. One night after a particularly intense court date, I sat down with Jake and Lily over dinner. We talked about their day, their friends, and everything else that kids their age worry about. Their laughter filled the room, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything would be okay. But the reality was always lurking just beneath the surface. Karen wasn't going to back down easily, and her attempts to manipulate the situation were growing bolder. I could feel the tension building, and I knew the final battle for custody was approaching fast. Everything came to a head during the final hearing. I prepared myself mentally for what was to come, knowing that I had to stay strong and focused. I wanted to ensure that Karen's actions could no longer jeopardize the kids' future. I realized that this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight for my children's innocence and well-being. I would ensure that they could grow up in a home free from the turmoil Karen had introduced into our family. It was time to put an end to the lies and manipulation once and for all. I could sense that victory was within reach. All I needed to do was stay the course. The final hearing felt surreal. I arrived at the courthouse early, my stomach twisting in knots as I prepared for what would likely be the most important day of my life. I had gathered all the evidence, all the proof of Karen's infidelity and its impact on our family. I knew there would be no more hiding behind excuses or manipulation. It was time for the truth to come to light. As I waited in the hallway outside the courtroom, I could see Karen packing back and forth, her expression a mix of anger and defiance. She was dressed formally, presenting herself as the picture of a devoted mother, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Her eyes darted around the room, and I knew she was trying to muster whatever strength she could to face me. I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had already made up my mind about the path I had to take. When the court session began, I took my seat, maintaining eye contact with the judge. The atmosphere was tense, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. Karen's lawyer began her presentation, outlining her argument for why Karen should retain custody of the children. She painted a picture of a loving mother who had made a one-time mistake but was ready to change for the better. I listened carefully, wanting to understand her strategy. Karen has been a devoted mother throughout the years, her lawyer argued. This affair was a lapse in judgment, not a reflection of who she is as a parent. We asked the court to consider her commitment to her children and the stability she can provide. The lawyer's words were like daggers, but I stood my ground. I knew that I had to counter her claims with the truth, and I was prepared to do just that. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath, collecting my thoughts before launching into my defense. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady but passionate. I don't deny that Karen has been a part of our children's lives, but her actions have shown a profound lack of judgment. She has been unfaithful, and this is not just a simple mistake. This is a pattern of behavior that has disrupted our family unit. I could see the judge's interest peaked as I laid out the evidence. I presented the texts, the photographs, and the timeline of events that highlighted my commitment as a father, contrasting it with Karen's reckless choices. The children deserve stability, and I believe they will find that with me. I continued, my voice rising with emotion. I want to create an environment where they can thrive without the fear of betrayal hanging over them. As I spoke, I could see Karen's expression shift from anger to desperation. She knew I was hitting the nail on the head and the truth was now out in the open. I didn't want to vilify her. I just wanted to show the court the reality of the situation. I've always put my children first, I asserted, and they deserve a parent who will love and protect them, not one who prioritizes her own desires over their well-being. Karen's lawyer stood to object, but the judge waved her off, allowing me to continue. I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air as I concluded. I know this is a difficult situation, but I firmly believe that my children will be better off with me full-time. I ask the court to consider their future and the stability they need right now. With that, I sat back down, my heart racing. I had laid everything out, and now it was time for the judge to deliberate. Corinne's lawyer tried to rebut my claims, but I could tell her arguments were losing steam. I focused on the children, on the life I wanted to provide them. After what felt like an eternity, the judge called us back into the courtroom. I could see Corinne fidgeting nervously beside me, and I braced myself for whatever decision was about to be announced. After reviewing the evidence and considering the circumstances surrounding this case, the court has come to a decision regarding custody. The judge began, his voice steady. While both parents have strengths, I must, unfortunately, consider the recent behavior that has raised concerns about the stability of the family environment. Corinne's face paled as the judge continued. Due to the evidence presented, including the documented infidelity and the resulting impact on the children's emotional well-being, I am awarding sole custody of Jake and Lily to Mike Thompson. Time seemed to freeze as the words sank in. I felt a rush of emotions, relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I had one, but at what cost? As I glanced at Corinne, I saw tears streaming down her face, and for a brief moment I felt a pang of sympathy. Still, I reminded myself that I was fighting for our children, and they needed someone who would prioritize them above all else. The judge continued, "Corinne will have visitation rights, but I implore you both to consider the impact of this situation on the children. They deserve a peaceful environment free from conflict." As the session wrapped up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but I knew the road ahead would still be challenging. I had to navigate co-parenting with Corinne, who wouldn't likely take this decision lightly. She had proven to be volatile, and while I was ready to protect my children at all costs, I knew I needed to tread carefully. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a mix of triumph and exhaustion. I had fought hard for Jake and Lily, and I was determined to provide them with the stability and love they needed moving forward. As I pulled out my phone to call my mom and share the news, I couldn't help but feel hopeful. "Mom, it's done. I got full custody," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank God, Mike. I knew you would fight for them," she replied, her voice filled with both relief and pride. "I just want to make sure they're safe," I said, looking around at the bustling street outside the courthouse. "Everything I do from here on out is for them." With a renewed sense of purpose, I drove home, ready to embrace this new chapter, ready to be the father my kids deserved. I knew the challenges weren't over, but I was prepared to face whatever came my way. I would ensure that my children would grow up in a nurturing environment, free from the toxicity that had threatened to tear us apart. It was time to rebuild our family, brick by brick, and I was ready for the journey ahead. In the weeks following the court's decision, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial rush of victory faded, and the reality of my new role as a single father sank in. I was now fully responsible for Jake and Lily, and while I had fought hard for this, I knew it was going to be a balancing act. I needed to be not just a father but a source of stability and love for them in the wake of the turmoil. Corinne's visitation rights meant that she would still be in our lives. I expected some resistance from her, but to my surprise, she seemed to retreat, at least for the time being. She was still reeling from the loss, and I was determined to keep things respectful for the sake of the kids. I reached out to her to discuss the visitation schedule, wanting to set a clear and fair arrangement. It was a tense conversation. Corinne had a facade of calm, but I could see the cracks beneath her surface. "I'll always be there for them, Mike. You can't just erase me from their lives," she said, her voice strained but defensive. "I don't want to erase you, Corinne. I want the kids to have a relationship with their mother, but it needs to be healthy for everyone involved," I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. We agreed on a schedule that allowed her to spend time with Jake and Lily, but I made it clear that I would be parenting with a firm hand. I would not allow her to undermine the stability I was working so hard to create. As the weeks turned into months, I threw myself into fatherhood. I took Jake to baseball practice, where he was now excelling under Kyle's coaching. It felt strange at times, being so closely tied to the very person who had been at the center of my pain, but I reminded myself that the kids needed that structure. I even met Kyle a few times during practice. Our interactions were polite but distant. He knew how I felt, and I could tell he was walking on eggshells around me. Lily kept me grounded too. We baked cookies on weekends and had movie nights where we snuggled up on the couch with popcorn and ice cream. It was a simple joy, but it filled my heart with warmth. I realized that every moment spent with them was a step toward healing, not just for them but for me as well. However, Corinne's visits were another story. Each time she came to pick up the kids, I could feel the tension in the air. She would often try to engage in small talk, but I kept things strictly about the kids. I was polite, but I wouldn't allow her to manipulate the situation anymore. One day, after she picked up Jake and Lily, I received a text from her. "You don't have to act like this, Mike. You know I'm trying to be better. Can't we at least be civil?" I took a moment before responding. "I'm not acting, Corinne. I'm protecting our children. I want them to have a healthy relationship with both of us. But that means you need to be honest with them and yourself." The exchanges continued like this, a tug-of-war over emotions and the past. But each time I stood my ground, I felt a little stronger. I reminded myself that I was doing this for Jake and Lily, and I would never let their mother's whims dictate our lives again. As summer approached, I decided to take the kids on a trip, something to mark the new beginning for our family. We planned a camping trip to a nearby national park, a place I had visited as a child. I wanted them to have experiences that brought us closer together, away from the chaos of our previous life. The trip was incredible. We hiked through lush trails, roasted marshmallows over a campfire, and shared stories under the stars. I watched Jake and Lily laugh and play together, their bond growing stronger. It was a beautiful reminder that even in the aftermath of heartbreak, joy could be found. One evening, as we sat around the campfire, I turned to them and said, "You know, no matter what happens, I will always be here for you. We're a team and we'll get through anything together." They both smiled, their faces illuminated by the glow of the fire. "We love you, Dad," Jake said, and Lily chimed in, "Yeah, you're the best." In that moment, I felt a rush of gratitude. I had fought hard for this family, and while Corinne's choices would always be a part of our story, they wouldn't define us. We were carving out our own path, and it was beautiful. As we returned home, I felt a sense of hope for the future. I knew there would still be challenges, especially with Corinne's ongoing attempts to regain control, but I was ready. I had learned that love and resilience could triumph over betrayal. In closing, I realized that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and we find ourselves in situations we never imagined. But through it all, I learned that standing up for what is right is crucial. My advice to anyone facing betrayal is to stay strong, keep your focus on those you love, and never lose sight of the future you want to build. It won't be easy, but the fight for your family is always worth it.